My parents ate the two small snakes I was raising and, as they had wished, gave birth to twin boys. But after that, a series of strange events began to unfold. This wasn't considered particularly unusual in our village. After all, it hid far more sordid secrets. I thought I was a cold observer, seeing through everything, the true puppet master. But when the dust settled, I was merely another person's pawn. The energy in this house is too heavy. You'll never have a son. Old Lady Tao scanned the room from the doorway, her gaze finally settling on me. Her stare made my scalp tingle. I lowered my head, trying to shrink into myself, my hands and feet trembling uncontrollably. The moment her words landed, my mother grabbed my hair and threw me to the ground. She raised her hand to strike me, but perhaps because we had a guest, she only kicked me twice, her frustration palpable. However, you have a root of fortune right here in your family. You can have twin sons. Old Lady Tao's tone shifted. She stepped into the house, my parents scrambling to follow. At her prompting, my parents ransacked my room and found the two small snakes. They were as thick as a man's thumb, pure white, and curled up in a nest of rags I had sewn for them. There really are snakes. I tried to crawl forward to stop them, but my father kicked me away. I let out a muffled grunt. A sweet taste filled my throat, and my chest ached with a dense, shattering pain. You wretched girl! Hiding such a good thing. Do you not want a little brother? He asked viciously, slapping me twice across the face. I wanted to open my mouth to explain that these snakes were not meant to be eaten. But I could only watch as my mother cradled the nest with the snakes, my father's arm around her, as they walked out overjoyed. They discussed following Old Lady Tao's instructions. One snake would be made into a stew, to be eaten over 7 days. The other would be steeped in wine, which they would begin drinking after the stew was finished, also for 7 days. But on the final day, the snake had to be swallowed whole, without chewing, or all would be for naught. Within half a month, my mother was certain to be pregnant with twin boys. Old Lady Tao was only half right. As for the other half, a smile touched my lips. I looked up and saw a large, silver-white serpent coiled on the ceiling beam, its tongue flicking in the air. That very night, my mother began drinking the snake stew. Strangely, for such small snakes, the aroma was incredibly fragrant and lingered in the air. My father drooled beside her, his eyes fixed on her bowl. But my stomach churned, the smell was sickeningly rank to me. My mother offered the last mouthful to my father. Well, the son will be ours. You should have some too. My father eagerly took the bowl and licked it clean. Then he threw the bowl at me, not forgetting to add a warning, don't you even think about stealing any. Not even a lick. Old Lady Tao had said that if the daughter of the house ate the snake, she would be damned for eternity. I swallowed my nausea and nodded. On the 8th day, my mother started on the snake wine. As before, she gave my father a small sip each day. With just that tiny amount, my father's complexion grew rosier, and he seemed full of vigor every day. My mother was very pleased, and the noises from their room at night grew louder. On the final day, it was time to swallow the whole snake. My mother hesitated, but my father pinched her jaw open. As he forced the snake into her mouth, he muttered, "Ashio, it's for our sons. Don't blame me." After swallowing the snake, my mother coughed violently and began to dry heave. My father, however, was ecstatic, his face flushed an unnatural red. "Are you throwing up? Are you pregnant?" He immediately sent me to the edge of the village to fetch Dr. Wang. I didn't dare refuse and quickly brought the doctor back. The moment he took her pulse, it was confirmed. My mother was pregnant. It had been about half a month, right around the time she started the snake stew. My father was immensely proud. It seems old Lady Tao really knows her stuff. That night, as I slept, I felt something cold and icy on my neck, and I thought I heard the flicking of a snake's tongue. Half asleep, I assumed it was my two little snakes being mischievous, coming to play with me again. I reached up to touch it, but the rough texture shocked me awake. There were no little snakes. My parents had eaten them. A drop of liquid fell on me. I looked up and saw a massive snake, its tongue flickering, saliva dripping onto my neck. I screamed. My parents were woken by the noise, and after a long moment, my father came over, cursing. I pointed terrified at the ceiling beam. "Snake! There's a snake! You damned girl! I'll teach you to lie!" My father slapped me twice, so hard I fell back onto the bed. The taste of rust filled my mouth. I looked up again. The snake was gone. 8 months later, my mother did indeed give birth to twin boys. From the moment they were born, my brothers were pale and smooth, not red and wrinkled like most newborns. Their favorite thing to do was stick out their tongues, just like a snake flicking its own. I also noticed white scales beginning to grow on their skin, shimmering with an iridescent light under the lamp. On impulse, I started to pick at them with my fingernail, and my brothers burst into terrified tears. My father rushed in and slapped me across the face, yelling, "If you can't take care of my sons, I'll kill you, you worthless girl." I looked down. There were no scales. My older brother's face was just red where I had scratched him, a pitiful sight. I began to wonder if I had imagined it, but then scales started appearing on my younger brother's face too. And these scales, only I could see them. My two brothers loved to stare at people, their gazes fixed and unblinking, as if sizing up their prey. My brother's 1-month celebration fell on the Ghost Festival. Normally, we would make offerings to our ancestors, but my parents couldn't be bothered. What were dead, formless ancestors compared to their soft, precious sons? Our house was the only one filled with joy. The Ghost Festival was a time when 100 ghosts roamed the night, and every other family was observing the taboos. That night, the moon was hidden and the wind was high. I had been busy since dawn, so exhausted I could barely lift a finger. Only 2 people truly enjoyed the celebration. The rest were either oblivious infants or worked to the bone. I collapsed into bed and quickly fell asleep. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream tore through the night. I woke with a start, recognizing my father's voice. His cries gradually became a mournful wail. Strangely, my mother and the 2 babies didn't seem to have been woken by the sound. The thought was terrifying. I abandoned any idea of getting up to look, trying to pull the covers over my head, but I found I couldn't move. Besides my father's screams, the only sound was the deafening thunder of my own heart. In that state of terror, I somehow fell asleep again. When I woke the next day, my father was outside, shouting, "You worthless thing, sleeping until the sun is high. Do you expect me to wait on you?" I shot out of bed. To make it easier for my parents to find me, I always slept in my clothes. That way, I could get to them faster, earning a few less curses and sometimes even avoiding a beating. I saw him at a glance. There were 2 bloody holes in his neck, right over the main artery, as if from a snake bite. Didn't it hurt? I didn't dare keep looking, and I certainly didn't dare ask. When I changed the baby's diapers, I noticed my mother didn't seem to question my father's neck either. Was I the only one who could see it again? A shiver ran down my spine. I pushed the thought down and started my chores. This continued for 7 nights. My father's voice grew weaker each day, and the bloody holes on his neck grew larger and darker. They still didn't seem to notice anything was wrong. It was still only me who could see. On the morning of the 8th day, I was woken by my mother's scream. I ran into the room and saw my father. He was dead, and his death was bizarre. His body was divided from head to toe into 7 equal parts, arranged in an S shape. His eyes were wide open, just like the little snake that had been made into a stew. Even stranger, a body cut into so many pieces should have bled profusely, but there was very little blood, just a small amount at the center of each cut. My mother was trembling with fear, unable to even look at him. She ordered me to cover him with a blanket, to hide the gruesome scene. As soon as I had, she sent me to find Old Lady Tao. When Old Lady Tao heard my description, her murky eyes stared intently at me. "Is that true?" I nodded frantically. She told me to go back first. I was to arrange my father's body parts in the coffin in order from head to toe, left side then right side. She warned me not to let anyone help, and above all, not to mix up the order. She was going to fetch her master. I memorized her words and went home to do as I was told. When it came time to place my father's feet, I put down the left foot I had just picked up, and instead reached for the right foot and placed it in the coffin. My mother was catatonic with fear, hiding in my room, not even hearing the cries of the babies. I was the one who picked them up and motioned for her to feed them. When she saw my hands, the same hands that had just moved the body parts, touch her, she screamed and swiped at me. Her hand missed me but left a long, bloody scratch on the younger baby's face. He wailed in pain, and the older one joined in. I just stood there, motionless. Seeing I had no reaction, my mother hesitantly took the younger baby from my arms, then cautiously picked up the older one. She turned her back to me and began to nurse them. "Ah!" My mother screamed again. Honestly, I was becoming immune to her screams. After everything that had happened, all she did was scream. But I patiently looked over, and what I saw startled me. My brothers had bitten 2 large holes into my mother's nipples. Blood mixed with milk trickled down, yet the 2 babies drank with expressions of pure bliss. Those 2 holes were almost identical to the ones on my father's neck. They were clearly snake bites. And as my brothers drank, they flicked their tongues, just like snakes. Old Lady Tao finally returned, bringing with her a charlatan of a Taoist priest. He opened his mouth and declared that our house was thick with malevolent energy. I rolled my eyes. A man had just died violently, of course the energy was malevolent. This was no time for standard procedures. The priest entered the house and directed me to paste the talismans he'd brought onto the head and foot of my parents' bed, and on the outside of their door. The rest went on the doors to the kitchen, the main hall, and the front gate. He gave 3 more talismans to my mother, for her and the 2 babies to wear on their bodies at all times. Why wasn't there one for me? I thought it, and I asked it. Before the priest could say anything, Old Lady Tao scoffed, "What's a little girl got to be afraid of? Even evil spirits don't like to eat girls." Was it because the so-called evil spirits weren't truly that evil, or because they were just a crowd of pitiable women? If you can make it through tonight, he can be buried in peace." The priest spoke in riddles, then flicked his horsetail whisk and left, without even asking for payment. But that made sense. Why would he charge a fee for cleaning up his own apprentice's mess? Before he left, the priest gave me a long, meaningful look. I paid it no mind. After seeing the two of them off, I prepared to close the door. But old Lady Tao turned back. "Girl, don't you find it strange? Something this big has happened, yet no one in the village knows, and no one has come to help." It was strange. But weren't the two of them even stranger? I looked at old Lady Tao without speaking. She thought I didn't understand. She muttered to herself, "You're just a girl, you can't handle this. A pity your father died so young, with no one to run the house. You really do need a son." Seeing I still had no reaction, she cleared her throat and said sternly, "Don't tell anyone yet. My master will handle it." It was the middle of the 7th lunar month, and the weather was hot. A faint stench was already rising from my father's body. The evening weather was beautiful. I thought the sky would be full of stars again. But in a moment, a fierce wind rose, and dark clouds blotted out the sky. My mother trembled with fear, hiding in my room and refusing to come out, deaf to the cries of her two sons. Night fell in an instant, and the rain began to pour. I had never seen such a heavy rain. It was as if a hole had opened in the sky, dumping water straight down. The house felt like it would be washed away. Then, with a loud crash, the roof of our main hall gave way. And in the main hall was my father's coffin. Another crash of thunder and lightning froze me in my tracks. I didn't dare move forward. By the light of the flashes, I saw that the talismans on the doors of the main hall, my parents' room, and the kitchen had all been blown off, vanishing into the rain. It was over. We hadn't made it through the night. The next morning, the priest arrived at our gate but refused to step inside. "Girl, go look at your father's coffin." I was afraid, but my mother was watching me, waiting. Terrified, I gathered my courage, approached the coffin, and glanced inside. Ugh! My father's body was a chaotic mess mixed with crimson rainwater, like a meat stew in the coffin that was its container. My mother had appeared behind me at some point. She was muttering, "Time to steep the wine." I thought she meant my father had been soaking for too long and was about to ask the priest what to do next. I looked toward the gate. The priest was gone. Good. Now I wouldn't have to find an excuse to seal the coffin as it was. The baby's cries came from the bedroom. My mother, as if waking from a dream, hurried inside. Watching her retreating figure, a slow smile spread across my face. It seemed no one knew my father was dead. Villagers would still greet me, ask after my mother and brothers, and wonder when my father would be back from the port city, and if he had really struck it rich. Their questions baffled me, and I could only offer vague answers, afraid they would sense something was wrong. But no one paid much attention to the inconsistencies in a 10-year-old story. More importantly, my mother had also started screaming every night, and each morning, the 2 bloody holes on her neck grew darker and darker. On the 7th day of my mother's screaming, a monk arrived at dusk. I thought he was begging for alms, so I went inside, found a steamed bun, and handed it to him, preparing to close the door. "Almsgiver, please wait. Has your family recently suffered a bloody disaster?" The monk blocked the door, his gaze passing over my head to look inside the house. For some reason, a chill crept into my heart, but I couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. I just had a vague feeling I shouldn't close the door. I don't know what you're talking about. Ba. Fate is at work. The almsgiver will understand when the time comes. He spoke in riddles, just like the priest, but perhaps he had real abilities. I still blocked the door, not wanting him to enter. The monk didn't press the issue. He just stared at me for a moment before speaking. Little almsgiver, hide yourself well tonight. Only come out after you hear the third rooster crow. Do not come out before then, and do not open your eyes. However, if the rooster crows a fourth time, you can only resign yourself to fate. There it was again. Were monks and priests all cut from the same cloth? Their warnings were identical. But I counted the days. Tonight should be the night of my mother's violent death. I really should hide well. As expected, my mother's screams tonight were faint, but I heard them clearly. I spent the whole night listening to her weak cries, never truly falling asleep. Strangely, it felt long past the time for the rooster to crow, but I hadn't heard a thing. Remembering the monk's words, I kept my eyes shut, but a peculiar, fragrant aroma of wine filled the air. It crept into my nostrils, so potent I almost felt drunk. Suddenly, a rooster crowed. Once, twice, 3 times. I waited for a long time. There was no fourth crow. The instant I cautiously opened my eyes, the fourth rooster crow rang out. I froze, terrified, and squeezed my eyes shut again. But nothing happened, at least not to me. Slowly, I could no longer hear any sound from my mother. The babies began to cry. I cautiously opened my eyes again. It was truly dawn. I scrambled up and thought I saw a figure flash past, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I rushed into my mother's room. She was lying perfectly still, her expression peaceful, her face rosy, as if she had fallen asleep drunk. Mom? There was no response. I checked for her breath. There was none. Although I had been prepared, I was still deeply shaken. I looked at the 2 babies, their faces red from crying. They must be hungry. I carried them back to my room and gave them some water. Without milk, I didn't know what else to feed them. Perhaps exhausted from crying, they soon fell asleep. This couldn't go on. They were too small to go hungry. With my mother dead, my only option was to seek help from the village. After much thought, I decided to find the village chief. But before I could leave, he came to me. What's going on in your house? It stinks, the village chief yelled from the doorway, pinching his nose and frowning. Did it stink? I honestly hadn't smelled anything. But my father had been dead for 8 or 9 days, soaking in water. Even with the coffin lid on, the stench couldn't be contained. Realizing this, I hurried out to invite him in. The chief had started to agree, but with 1 foot over the threshold, he stepped back out. I won't come in. When is your father coming back from the port city? I stammered, unsure how to answer. The chief grew impatient. Where's your mother? I'll ask her. She's dead. What? The village chief was about my father's age. I used to find it strange that at their age, my father was still aimless while he was already the chief. Later, I learned that the chief's father had been the chief, and his grandfather before him. They called it, taking over the post. Inside the house, I followed the chief's gaze to the center of the main hall, where a coffin sat under the hole in the roof. The foul stench was coming from it. That's my father. A strange liquid was seeping from the coffin, and upon closer inspection, I could see a dense mass of squirming maggots. The sight made my skin crawl. Ugh! The village chief couldn't hold it in. I, however, had grown somewhat accustomed to it and watched him calmly. When he finished vomiting, I motioned for him to follow me to see my mother. The smell of wine in my mother's room was even stronger, completely overpowering the stench from outside. The chief took a few deep breaths, as if to steady himself. Looking at my mother, he called her name uncertainly a few times. There was no response. Indeed, with her rosy complexion and peaceful stillness, she looked as if she had simply had too much to drink. My mother is dead too. The chief's head snapped up. He looked at me as if I were a ghost, his face pale and his voice trembling. You. Before he could finish, my brother's cries came from the other room. They must have woken up hungry again. Village chief, my parents are both dead. I'll starve with my 2 brothers. Can you help us? I can eat anything, but my brothers need milk. As I spoke, I watched his reaction, calculating the odds he would agree. Before I could decide, he already had. The village will pay for your brother's milk powder. He agreed that easily. Once we were outside my house, the village chief's color slowly returned, and his reason seemed to catch up with him. Tell me the truth. What happened to your parents? Don't tell me, it was you? Or the snakes? The chief stared at me fiercely, as if trying to see through me. I wasn't afraid. I met his gaze and gently shook my head. No matter what he said, how he asked, or how he tried to persuade me, I just shook my head and remained silent. Perhaps seeing he was getting nowhere, the chief sighed and said that such a serious matter would be difficult to handle. At this, I spoke. Is this really considered such a big deal in our village? The chief was likely not expecting me to say that, and he was struck dumb. He was right. Our village had more than its share of strange occurrences. When you thought about it, my parents' deaths might not even be the most bizarre. Our village was a classic closed community, not just geographically, but as an independent and absurd human society, a physical symbol of the villagers' spiritual isolation. The people here almost never left to work. They tended their small plots of land, yet every family was wealthy, including ours. The story was that our grandparents' generation had created enough wealth for several generations to live comfortably. The only rule was that they must not touch the snakes. Someone once refused to believe it. Hearing that snake meat was nourishing, he dug up a snake den in winter, shut his door, and stewed a large pot. His whole family ate until their bellies were round. That night, their house was surrounded by snakes. The entire family was eaten. It wasn't until the 3rd day that they discovered the family's daughter was still alive. She had witnessed everything. She had been sick that day and had gone to bed early. Her family had left a small bowl of snake stew for her, which was still on the table. That daughter was Old Lady Tao. From a young age, we children were taught by the village teacher, another hereditary position, that if we ever encountered a snake on the road or by chance, we had to kneel, kowtow 3 times, and respectfully ask it to leave, or we would face terrible misfortune. No one knew why. The rule is still followed today, but no one has seen a snake for years. Except for me, and the 2 I kept in my room. The village chief must have remembered something. Go ask Old Lady Tao. Don't worry about anything else. Would asking Old Lady Tao do any good? Even her master didn't dare come back. I thought of the monk again. It was strange how he had just vanished. What about my brothers? The chief seemed to just then remember there was more than just me in my family. I'll take them back with me in a bit. You go find old Lady Tao first. I didn't trust him, so I insisted on taking my brothers to his house myself before I would go. He couldn't argue me down and agreed. Only after I saw my brothers drinking the goat's milk the chief had given them and falling into a deep sleep did I leave. I knew the truth. The chief wouldn't dare mistreat them. After all, the better cared for a young boy was, the higher the price he would fetch. One of the village chief's special privileges was selling the village's parentless children. They didn't call it that, of course. They said the children were being adopted out to good homes where they would have better lives. At first, everyone believed it. But the only ones adopted out were a few very handsome boys and almost all of the girls. The fees received for the adopted girls were so substantial that they ignited the greed of the villagers. Perhaps everyone knew the truth in their hearts. They couldn't bear to send their sons away, but their daughters were another matter. They could get a handsome sum in return, so why not? The prettier and cuter the girl, the higher the price. And so, a new industry emerged in the village, buying beautiful women from outside to have children. A son was good, but a daughter was even better. For a time, the old saying was reversed: people preferred daughters to sons. After all, who would turn down more money? Old Lady Tao wasn't home. The house looked as if it hadn't been lived in for a long time. I secretly climbed into her house and, feeling safe, fell asleep. A howl woke me up. It was the village chief. I looked out the window. It wasn't yet light, and it was raining again, harder than the night my father died. It was strange. Old Lady Tao's house was at least a mile from the chief's, yet I could hear him clearly, while no one else seemed to. Even the village's many black dogs were silent. Since I was awake, I turned on the light and examined the room's furnishings. The house was simple, the furniture clearly decades old. This was odd. After her family died, Old Lady Tao inherited everything. Besides, she had her skill. The villagers would seek her out for any matter, big or small. Where had all the good things gone? I felt no shame in searching. If it weren't for her idea, would I be without a place to sleep now? I began to rummage through her things and finally found a notebook filled with drawings. Old Lady Tao was illiterate, and so was I. I opened it. One drawing I recognized, my parents holding the small snakes. My father's large mole was drawn with uncanny accuracy. Suddenly, the entire house felt imbued with an unspeakable eeriness. Looking closely, I realized the source of the strangeness, the overwhelming presence of snake elements throughout the room. There were snake skins and bones on the rafters, jars of snake wine in the corner, and the headboard of the bed was carved in the shape of a snake's head. All of it was just hidden enough to be easily missed. Weren't snakes never seen? Weren't people forbidden from harming them? What was Old Lady Tao doing? A chill ran down my spine. At daybreak, I went out into the courtyard, and things became even more bizarre. Old Lady Tao's yard looked like a small sacrificial site, also covered in snake totems. There was a dry well in the yard. I summoned my courage and looked down. I immediately collapsed to the ground. It was Old Lady Tao, being devoured by a dense swarm of snakes. Only her face was visible, her eyes wide open. I opened the courtyard gate to leave and saw the monk from the other day standing right outside. I didn't have time to think. I tried to bolt, but the monk stepped aside, blocking my path. "There are snakes," I trembled, pointing back inside, my scalp tingling, my body covered in goosebumps. "Almsgiver, there are indeed snakes inside." He knew, and he still wouldn't let me run? Had this monk eaten so many vegetables his brain had turned to mush? I tried to go around him, but he blocked me again. Was this not brought on by the almsgiver herself? The monk stared at me intently. I met his gaze without flinching. "What nonsense are you talking, monk? I don't understand." But he pressed closer. "You deliberately let them find out about those two little snakes, didn't you? You had your parents' deaths planned from the start. Your two brothers are your two small snakes. Am I being clear enough?" I dropped my frantic, helpless act, a slow smile spreading across my lips. So what if I did? What if I didn't? This monk was certainly confident. Did he really think he had me all figured out? Still, his all-knowing expression annoyed me. I couldn't stand anyone knowing my true thoughts, not even if they were just pretending. "Monk, mind your own business." With that, I quickly walked around him and left. I felt a sense of urgency. I was more concerned about what last night's storm had done to my mother than I was with dealing with him here. I walked quickly. The monk didn't follow. For some reason, I felt a vague sense of unease. As I neared my house, I was hit by a strange, strong aroma of wine. It seemed the process was complete. Inside, I saw my mother submerged in the water vat. Combined with the smell of wine, it was as if she had been steeped into a medicinal liquor. I cupped my hands, scooped some up, and drank. It tasted just like the snake wine my mother had drunk. It was truly fragrant, no wonder my parents had liked it so much. I looked around the small house that had imprisoned me for so many years, that had held me captive. It seemed leaving would have been so easy. Why had I lacked the courage back then? When I was little, my parents never liked me. They always said they were keeping me around to do things for them, or they wouldn't be feeding me for free. When I got a little older, they started planning. When they had a son, I would raise him. When my brother was old enough to be on his own, they would marry me off to the old widower next door for a bride price to save up for my brother's future wife. I lived in this fear day and night, afraid of having a brother, afraid of this house. The only ones who were kind to me, who comforted me, were the two small snakes. When I found them, the mother snake was badly injured. After confirming I wouldn't harm her young, she left, returning only a few times to check on them, never staying long. Until one time, I cut my hand while cooking. Blood got on the vegetables. Afraid of being scolded, I secretly threw the bloody vegetables away. But my father saw. Without a word, he yanked me to the ground and kicked me in the chest. I let out a muffled grunt, the sickeningly sweet taste of blood filling my throat. Then I watched as my father picked up the vegetables I had thrown away and licked the blood off them. My eyes widened. I looked at my mother, her face impassive, as if this were a common sight. I walked into the room where I slept and saw the body of old Lady Tao's master, the Taoist priest, under the bed. How dull. All he knew was how to give bad advice, teaching his apprentice skills that brought suffering to living things. He deserved to reap what he had sown. The snakes in old Lady Tao's house were surely not her work alone. This fake priest was no good either. He had realized from the beginning that something was amiss, which was why he spoke in such ambiguous terms. So all of them deserved what they got. I walked out the door and looked back. Perhaps all of this was meant to have an ending. And that ending was today. Then, I slowly walked towards the village chief's house. As I neared the chief's courtyard, I could hear him and his wife scheming from a distance. Twin boys, eh? They must be worth a lot. We have to find a good buyer. Don't worry, I've already made inquiries. The price this time is more than double the usual. They might as well have announced it to the world. The couple was thoroughly corrupt. The chief's family was one thing, but his wife came from a long line of snake catchers. It was said her snake stew was so fragrant you could smell it for miles. I had discovered this secret as a child, when I had run off to avoid doing chores. That afternoon, on a small path outside the village, I saw the chief hand a child to a man. The man gave the chief a stack of money. The chief spat on his fingers and began to count. Finally, they reached an agreement and went their separate ways. As the strange man turned, I saw the child in his arms. It was Xiaohua from the village. Her entire family was gone, supposedly due to a natural disaster. I clearly remembered the chief saying that children like her would be cared for by the village, and if possible, they would find good homes for them to start new lives. But for some reason, the girls in the village charity hall always had all sorts of injuries, dents and overlapping, with new ones appearing constantly. Slowly, the number of children grew, and then it dwindled. Until the chief and his wife couldn't resist the temptation and started buying and selling children for profit. When the villagers found out, they all objected. The reason, of course, was not some laughable sense of empathy, but because they weren't getting a cut. They were jealous. Eventually, they reached an agreement. The chief and his wife could continue their business, but they had to give the others a dividend. It wouldn't be fair for the chief to be feasting while they didn't even get a sip of the soup. My father was one of them. I stood at the gate, not entering. Instead, I quietly watched as a small snake squeezed through the crack in the door. As expected, I heard the screams of the chief and his wife. Ah! Where did this snake come from? Their voices startled the babies, and my two brothers began to cry. The entire courtyard descended into chaos. I listened from outside, satisfied. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. When they were exhausted, a rustling sound, accompanied by the flicking of snake tongues, came from not far away, a sound that made one's blood run cold. I turned. So many snakes, like a great army, were coming from the direction of Old Lady Tao's house. They were heading not just for the chief's home, but for the homes of everyone else involved in the child trafficking. Ah! Screams erupted from all corners of the village, screams of terror, of disgust, of surprise. The entire village was in an uproar. After what felt like an eternity, everything fell silent. I gently pushed open the gate. Snakes crawled all over the bodies of the chief and his wife. Their eyes were wide, their mouths agape. Suddenly, a snake slithered into the chief's mouth, and another, smaller one, into his wife's ear. My two brothers were gone. In their place were two small, silver-white snakes, their color setting them apart. They crawled towards me. I held out my hand, and they expertly wound themselves around my arm, cool and smooth. I walked out and followed the main path through the village. Panicked people were everywhere, and snakes were everywhere, so dense there was nowhere to step. I returned one last time to my own home, set it on fire, and quietly departed. The snakes that had been impossible to drive away a moment ago all vanished at once, as if they had never been there at all. At the village entrance, I ran into the monk again. I looked at him with great interest. He returned my gaze with a faint smile. Neither of us spoke. The standoff was tense. I felt a strange sense of familiarity, but I couldn't recall where I had seen him, other than in the past few days. Suddenly, I saw a faint scar at the corner of his eye. It was identical to the one on the face of the village teacher who had disappeared years ago. So it was him. That explained everything. The teacher was a rebel. He had a stable, respected position, but he threw it all away and left, abandoning his family inheritance. That was the gossip among the villagers. But I had always thought he was a man with his own ideas, not like my father, not like the chief, not like the others in the village. Mr. Lin? The monk nodded, as I had expected, a profound, mysterious look on his face. I didn't care about any of it. I just wanted to leave this place as quickly as possible. Seeing I was about to go, the monk took a step to the side and said, "Years ago, I foresaw this day. I left to seek a way to break the cycle, but now it seems." Hiss! Why did he have to speak in such riddles? I had no patience for it. I rolled my eyes and walked away without looking back. You did very well. More nonsensical words. I turned, ready to give the monk a piece of my mind, but I saw that a large, silver-white snake had coiled itself beside him. The small snakes on my arm seemed to sense it and slithered down to join the larger one. So that's how it was. Memories of the villagers' gossip about him flooded my mind. They said his family were descendants of shamans who revered snakes, but their influence had waned after the village began to catch them. His family never harmed snakes. They slowly took on the role of educating the village. But the people here were stubborn, astonishingly foolish, content to just live off their inheritance. Then, somehow, his sister disappeared. His parents went mad. And then he himself left. The Lin family was no more in the village. Only then did I understand. The true settling of debts was nothing more than a turn of fate's wheel. People always have to pay the price for what they have done. Only by holding fast to one's own heart can evil receive its just deserts, and a full circle be achieved.